Hello there. When we began the Fourth Generation podcast in 2021, our objective was not tabloid-style reporting or over-dramatization as you find in today's popular media circles. Rather, it was an effort to help us extract what we called then ideological or conceptual tools of analysis to understand our day-to-day politics on the African continent. With that understanding that you can't change what you don't understand, something that comes up later on in this episode, we felt that this step of understanding was critical for any African who was intent on engaging actively with and changing the politics of the African continent. This diagnosis has not changed as we bring the Fourth Generation podcast to YouTube under the moniker the Fourth Generation Fireside. The concept of a fireside is a nod to the saloon-style nature of our conversations that we feature here, which are meant to inform, challenge, engage, as opposed to the presentist analysis of politics, and obviously the sensationalism and the combative excitement which you can find on other podcast platforms, on WhatsApp groups with people discussing politics and the likes. I've been reflecting on the first couple of episodes of the podcast, and I realized that many of them involved me simply asking questions, listening, and learning from those we invited. The first episode of the Fireside typifies this trend. It's an informative and formative conversation I had with Mr. Faith Abiodun in 2021 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa. Then I was a student at the African Leadership Academy. Mr. Faith was then the executive director of Future Africa, which still aims to connect and nurture public sector leaders on the African continent. He was also on the executive team of African Leadership Academy, overseeing communications, marketing, program recruitment, and partnerships, in addition to serving as then my pastor at the ALA Church. Mr. Faith is now the executive director of the movement we know as the United World Colleges, that has been so instrumental in educating so many people across the world. I found the conversation with Mr. Faith then beyond insightful and illuminating. I still do today, especially for any young person with an interest in what we call politics. What is politics? Politics really is anything that transcends your individuality and impinges on the public realm. And the conversation as well was very informative as far as activism is concerned. So enjoy, learn, and engage. Thank you very much, Pastor Faith, for honoring my invitation to speak to young people on the show. I'll jump straight into it. At this point, it's very clear that for fundamental change to take place in Africa, policy has to change and institutions have to be empowered. In 2013, well knowing this and the role that young people could play in this process, you founded the African Leadership Academy Model African Union, what you know now as ALA-MAU. Through ALA-MAU, I have people like me, for example, have been able to, as a committee chair, undertake a whole qualitative research project culminating into the writing of a research paper, a study guide on curtailing state policing power during crisis to safeguard human rights. I have other colleagues who've done several research projects on different subjects. So did you ever imagine back then that it was going to be a platform through which young people could express the opinions on the most pressing issues in Africa? And if so, how effective do you think it has been since in projecting these voices to the real policymakers?
Yeah, thanks for that. Firstly, I think founding the Model African Union, the hope was that young people will address one of the steps, or that we could address one of the steps that's necessary for young people to take in order for them to be, to really get themselves on the journey of tangible change making on the continent. And that first step is a step of knowledge. Too many of us want to create change, but we don't really understand the platforms through which we hope to create that change. And it's easy at that level to resort to criticism. And when you're criticizing what you don't understand, your criticism is often unfounded or intangible, because you're just agitating, but you don't really understand what it would look like for change to happen. And I've seen that as a huge challenge for lots of young people, not just in this generation, but over time, is that we allow a spirit of activism to overtake the attitude that we're supposed to develop, which is, first of all, humble yourself to figure out how systems work, understand the deficiencies that the current systems have, and then you can decide if it will take a whole new system altogether to bring about the change that you're looking for, or if you simply have to walk through the systems that exist. So the gap that we're trying to solve was a gap of knowledge. And so what the Model African Union did was to put young people in a space where they were confronted with the decisions that they're expecting the current leaders to take on their behalf, and then see if they can do it differently under considerably less pressures, meaning that they don't actually report to a million citizens or 5 million citizens or 200 million citizens. They also don't have the constraints of actually having to create the budgets that it will require for them to, to implement the change that they want. So if you strip away all of those pressures, and if it's simply down to the issues, do you actually know what it will take for those issues to become better? Across education, infrastructure, healthcare, immigration, you name it, there are huge complex issues that our continent faces, and the goal is that young people should be able to learn. Now, you have to imagine what happens post that stage. If we can get past that first phase of becoming better knowledgeable about the systems we're trying to implement, can we then do the hard yards of lobbying people and drafting actual policy and bringing back all of those constraints that you remove in a simulation? Now you have to bring back budgets, you have to bring back people, you have to bring back citizens, legislators, all kinds of bureaucratic structures that make change really, really hard. So I think the Model African Union has kicked off that process of changing the narrative of young people positioning themselves to do things differently. It's not the only answer, and it's not a perfect answer, but it certainly plugs a gap.
And I think in line with knowledge, I think recently in one of your blog posts, you really articulated this well when you said that you cannot change what you do not understand. So young people, and I think MAU is one of those things that really help young people to understand how the system works. Yeah, so also all over the world, you see that young people are becoming the face of climate change activism. And from Greta Thunberg in Sweden, Vanessa Nakate back home in Uganda, who both addressed the World Economic Forum in Davos. So accompanying this activism and agitation, you've seen that there have been a lot of sort of sarcastic and lukewarm responses from world leaders like Donald Trump, who have simply in most cases brushed aside these concerns. So why do you think this is the case for young people trying to actively participate in designing their future?
The beauty of young activism is equally the burden of young activism, right? The beauty of young activism is that you're a fresh voice. You've not yet become cynical the way the older generation is about change. The older you get and the less things change, the more cynical you become about the possibility of things. So as a young person stepping into a space of activism, you're doing that in the hope that your voice will be the difference and your work will be the difference. But you're also going up against generations and at times centuries of inertia. And you're up against the same adults who are in position to have addressed the concerns that you're bringing to the table, but who haven't done so. So it's part and parcel of the journey of change making that you have to fight past this inertia that might be internal initially and then external as well, when you realize that there are forces in place that have retained the structure of the world as it is. It's embarrassing, obviously, to come up against adults who act like bullies, especially when they have public platforms like presidencies. And the people whose voices we respect in the public sector, the other leaders whom we look up to as role models, they're people who began their activism in their youth as well. And so it's very easy to contrast the types of leaders to whom one should pay attention and the others to whom we should pay no attention whatsoever. So I will not certainly ask any young person to look to Donald Trump as there for validation, right? Because he hasn't a track record of supporting credible causes, especially when it comes to activism. But on the other hand, you look to other world leaders, your Barack Obamas, etc., who begun activism in their own youth, and you're likely to see them supporting youth activism as well, because it's the journey that they have walked, and they're likely to be more respectful of that. But on the whole, a young person must find their validation from the cause that they're hoping to achieve, not necessarily from external voices, because there will always be naysayers. And if we listen to the words of Nelson Mandela, he always said, or he said at one point, that it always seems impossible until it is done, right? So every big wave of change we've seen in the world, it always appeared impossible. But when it is done, you reset the order of the whole world, and people begin to realize, well, maybe this is also possible. And so the job of young people is to not listen to cynics, but to draw their inspiration from their own mission.
You yourself, you've had an opportunity, I think, to address a number of audiences, including the World Innovation Summit for Education. Did you ever feel like your submissions were being heard but not listened to or taken into account, and that maybe the patriarchs of the system were just putting on a show to just make sure that the youth are engaged, but yet in actual sense they do not want to listen to you?
I certainly felt like I was being heard on the platforms that I've been privileged to grace. And the challenge for young people who are coming up in activism is to ensure that they're adding much more than a youth voice to conversations. A youth voice cannot be substituted for underqualified or under-researched thoughts, right? So bringing a youth voice to the table doesn't mean that you're offering platitudes. It means that you've got to be advancing a conversation. Certainly when Malala Yousafzai speaks about education, people don't listen to her as a young person. They listen to her as someone who's saying, you know, one teacher or one pen or one textbook can change the face of education, which is the absolute truth. So she's not saying those things as a young person, she's saying those things as a practitioner. And my experience certainly has been that when I have approached conversations from a point of research, from a point of personal understanding, from a point of personal experience, that people pay attention. And so if there are young activists who are wondering what they have to do to be taken seriously, the answer has got to be ensure that you are advancing the conversation rather than rehashing the thoughts of other people. At the very least, present your own experiences, your own unvarnished thoughts. No one can fight against the experience that you have had, right? If you're saying as a young person, you know, as a young student, here is what my learning experience was, and here is how it can be better. No one has the right to say your learning experience is wrong because it's your experience, right? But on the other hand, you see young people who approach conversations repeating the same conversation that everyone else has been putting forward. And their voices are less likely to be taken seriously because they're not adding anything tangible to a conversation. And I felt certainly that in the times when I have addressed audiences, as long as my experiences were authentic to me and my solutions or my recommendations were coming from a place of research, I have felt well respected.
So I think definitely you'd agree that the youth, instead of just playing this card of I need to be in this platform because I'm young, need to have something that you're going to add to the conversation. Okay, in an earlier episode of this podcast, I spoke with your former student, Obakeng Lesean, who has since MAU days here at ALA, spoken also on lots of platforms, different audiences. So he was of the opinion that true change happens after that speech on the stage, not on the stage itself. And you realize that today more and more young people have access to more and more of these platforms to voice their opinions. So what action do you think should accompany these speeches?
I agree with Obakeng that change happens beyond the stage. But what happens on the stage is equally important. At times we underestimate the power of words. And if you look at the history of the world, people have gone to war on the back of speeches. People have rebuilt economies on the back of speeches. People have ended wars on the backs of speeches. So words have intangible power, and we cannot underestimate the power of a person who knows how to use a stage to get people to work. But importantly, the work doesn't end on the stage. There are a couple of steps that people need to take as you're approaching this journey of change making. The first and foremost, and I'll always repeat that, is understanding, knowledge. research the industry in which you want to work, or research the sector in which you want to work. So first of all, come up with understanding of what is wrong. Then you can step into a space of innovation by looking at what is wrong and wondering, if we flip this on its head, what does that process look like? What does that outcome look like? Innovation is very, very important. You need to say, if education is failing because we're leaving lots of people behind, what does it look like if we get everyone involved? So by simply flipping a question on its head, you've got the room to create a solution. So what does it look like if every child in Africa went to school? First, you have to know how many kids of school age are there in Africa? How many kids are between the ages of 4 to 6 across 54 countries in Africa? You gotta get that research. And when you get that research, you imagine, what's a reasonable classroom size? Let's assume a classroom size should sit 30 people. Well, what's it gonna take for, let's assume, 30 million people to have access to 30, to classes of no more than 30? We're saying them in a million classrooms. We need a million teachers. And then from there, you begin to imagine what the steps are to create change, right? They can look at, well, how many classrooms do we have per capita across the continent today? How many teachers do we have? Do we have what it takes to serve a population? And if we can do that in 1 year, over the course of 5 years, what's it going to take for us to do that? That's the thought process that leads to change. By simply flipping a situation on its head, questions are what create solutions, not answers. We have to keep going for questions. You're asking yourself, what is the question that we need to ask that moves the conversation from where it is to where it could be, right? Flip a situation on its head. So the first step is understanding. Research, understand where you're trying to work. Secondly, innovate by flipping a situation on its head. But the third step is more important. It's called engagement. So when you create this innovation, this fancy idea about how things could work, that's not the end. You now have to figure out whom you need to engage with. Who are the practitioners in the field today? Who are the decision makers? Who are the potential funders? Who are your peers who have to lobby with you and do the street protests and go into boardrooms and write the papers? There are varying levels of engagement that a person needs to follow. But first of all, research, explore, understand the issues. Secondly, develop those innovations in your mind. You have the answers. So if someone approaches you and says, education is flawed, you have to ask them, what about education is flawed? Is it access to education? Is it equity of education? Is it the outcomes of education? You need to know exactly what your advocacy is all about. Advocacy is all about. But if you keep listening to people out there on social media, they give you a blanket statement. Oh, the government is failing. But what exactly about the government is failing? Is it our agriculture that's failing? Is it our immigration that's failing? Is it our policing that's failing? Is it our irrigation process that are failing? You gotta get really specific. So my advice again for young people who are imagining what role they might play in addressing our challenges across the continent, break things down, get down to the basics. What problem are you trying to solve? And then look for those component parts of that problem. Is it the teachers? Is it infrastructure? Is it the textbooks? Is it the internet? What exactly is the problem? And then if I flip that thing on its head, what might the answer be? And once I'm armed with that answer, I now need to begin to engage the varying parties that can help to bring that answer to life.
Okay, so Pastor Faith, about a fortnight or so ago, I think you published an article on your website talking about how Barack Obama and other luminaries inspired you as a young man that enabled you at the age of 20 to launch two organizations. You particularly talked about how you watched speeches by Martin Luther King, Tony Blair, Obama himself, in order to teach yourself public speaking. So why do you think it's important for young people to be able to master this art?
Communication is powerful. And at times you underestimate how powerful it is until you see those who are doing it with excellence and getting the types of results that they're getting. I dare say that Barack Obama would have been another nice politician if he did not have the power of words to move people to tears. And he found a way to communicate not just the desires of his heart, but a picture of the future that he wanted to build for America. But not, there have been politicians over time who have had arguably more comprehensive policy proposals. But in Obama, you saw an example of both of those worlds coming together, ideas and communication. And when you bring those two things together, you move people to take action. And all the people who voted for Obama said, we see in this man and we hear in the words he's saying the future in which we want to live. But you've had many other politicians who had equally credible ideas. There have been other Black politicians who've come after Obama, but they haven't galvanized populations around their mission because they were missing that one thing, that power of words. And when you look at Nelson Mandela equally, Mandela was not just an intelligent man with a history. He was a man who had words, and that's why he's widely quoted, because you can take any of Mandela's speeches all the way from when he was a young lawyer, right, approaching his trial, in 1964 in Rivonia, and being able to say words that have become so punchy, so powerful, that many people have repeated many times, that this guy said, I'm not for Black domination, I'm not for white domination, right? And people listen to that and think, oh my, but that was in 1964. So many years ago. You go all the way back to Martin Luther King as well. He was not the first person who came up wanting to fight for the rights of Black people in America, but he was one person who had the right words. And many people have actually said that his most famous speech in 1963, I Have a Dream, he did not script those words. He came up with them on the fly, right? So to be able to create words that become quotes that people have rehearsed for years, and people have, reproduced in multiple ways on the fly without having rehearsed them. And I've listened to several of his speeches. I've been to the mountaintop, the final speech he delivered the night before he died. And you look at all of those words, and now we have the privilege of reading the actual text. But back in these days, those guys were simply saying those words, and those words became quotes. It shows you the power of communication to move people to action. On the negative side, Adolf Hitler himself used words to move a nation against another nation, right? And we have one of the worst atrocities ever committed by humankind by the power of words. Last night, I was actually still reading an account about the Rwandan genocide, and I've read several accounts about it. But you listen as well to the words that were used to describe fellow human beings as cockroaches. We have to crush the cockroaches. Go out there and destroy the cockroaches. In your mind, you think about, yeah, that's the right thing to do. You destroy a cockroach until you realize a cockroach was a fellow human being, right? So words have power, either for good or for evil. And a person who's a skilled communicator can deploy this tool of words for a good cause or for an evil cause. And if we're speaking to a generation of young people who want to do good in the world, they won't go very, very far without being able to communicate those ideas. And so every young person who underestimates the power of words has not yet set themselves up for a career of success. You can't go past improving your communication skills.
I think that's definitely a big challenge for people who hope to take on this path. As many young people like us, being able to articulate ourselves and the challenges that we see ourselves on the continent facing and the solutions that we want to advance. Then still, you realize that almost 60% of our population in Africa is under 25. But then, much as we are the youngest population in the world, young people are complaining a lot day and night about social and political exclusion. What do you think the problem is? If this is the case, what do you think the remedy to this entire fracas on political exclusion is?
You realize that the people to whom you are agitating today as a young person, your elders, 50, 60 years ago, they were in your position as well. And the odds were stacked against them far worse than the odds are stacked against us today, right? And the generation that we're expecting to deliver change into our hands, they received the positions they have today by fighting for it, tooth and nail. Many of them sacrificed their lives for it. So young people cannot afford the luxury of expecting change to happen. We have to make it happen. Far too many young people have become skilled at complaining when they should be becoming skilled at innovating. This is not the time to say, education is failing us. Our infrastructure is not good. This is the time to say, what can I do? We each have to flip that conversation. You gotta flip the conversation. People who complain remain complainers for the rest of their lives. People who innovate are the ones who lift others out of poverty. And so it's up to us in our generation to say, the people we're complaining to, they delivered the little victory that they have today, the vast majority of them, by fighting for those things. You look at the vast majority of our presidents, our leaders, a lot of them were freedom fighters. A lot of them are people who put themselves on the line to deliver independence for our countries, and then to imagine what it's like to build industries against all kinds of constraints. Obviously, in the middle of that, corruption came into place because it's part of human nature that when you become a little bit comfortable, you abandon the cause, right? So it's up to the next generation to make them a little bit uncomfortable as well by figuring out, well, what is the next level of this mission that our parents began that we need to continue, or at least the generation that came ahead of us. So we must realize that the struggle remains the same, slightly adjusted, but still the same struggle for economic independence. But the players are now different, and the opportunities are different. They improved, actually. We have a lot more infrastructure to organize. We have a lot more educated people in our ranks. We have a lot more skill of communication and global inspiration from all over the world. So it should technically be easier for us to win this war that our forefathers began. But rather, we're getting complacent. And rather, we're complaining about the fact that people haven't delivered victory to us. We should be on the battlefield, imagining what role each of us can play in specific sectors. We don't all have to fight the same battle. But each of us must figure out, if I could address one challenge, if I could create one set of solutions for Africa in my time, which challenge will I face? And then just go for it. That's my charge.
So just on the same thought, you realize that in Africa now it's often said that it's a young continent ruled by old people, you know, and the statistics do support that. The median age of the African leader, of course, is 62. So there's this question of the old guard versus the young blood, you know. And so I have two questions here. One, do you think it's a matter of the young versus the old? And secondly, do you also subscribe to the school of thought that for this continent to move forward, young people must be driving this political vehicle?
No to both points. It's not young versus old. It's determined versus comfortable, right? There are people who are comfortable young with the status quo, and they don't care about how bad things are. And there are those who are determined that things have to be done differently. You'll find both categories actually in the elder generation as well. There are older people who are fighting tooth and nail today to see Africa different, and there are older people who are complacent. So for me, it's not young versus old. Matter of fact, if you kill everyone who's 30 years and above in Africa today, Africa's problems will remain the same and perhaps get even worse, because you have a generation that simply had things handed to them without having to fight for them or appreciate what it took to get victory. The old people whom you're looking at today, they fought in the youth to get the results that they have. And so they're far better trained to do the work they're doing today. Again, there are bad eggs in every population. But the vast majority of the people we look to today across the continent are leaders. They were freedom fighters who in their youth decided that things will not remain the same. So now we're expecting those who fought hard for the positions they're holding to simply relinquish them so that we can come take over, and then do what? What are you going to do? I've asked myself, as intelligent as I think I am, as determined as I think I am, if I were appointed president of a country today, or minister of whatever, do I have better solutions than what's on the table? Have I researched? The job of young people is not to agitate for position. The job of young people is to prepare themselves to act differently. So it's not youth versus old. So I don't think that simply if young people get into position today, everything is going to be solved. It's not the truth. If young people research the problems, create innovations, they will be better positioned to solve problems, not because they're young, but because they're prepared. It's not about youth. It's not about age. It's about the quality of preparation. You could have a 70-year-old man who goes to war and does fantastically well in that war. You could have a 25-year-old man who goes to war and completely flunks. It's not about the strength. It's about the preparation. And so, again, the challenge for young people is don't agitate, research, innovate, and then engage. We have to do the work rather than expect people to just give us position because we're young.
Yeah, Mr. Faith, I think you've made a very important distinction between the comfortable and the determined. But then today you find out that even the few are determined and have equipped themselves with the right set of knowledge to be able to actually effectively contribute once called upon, are less likely to engage in active politics. That is in terms of vying for these political positions in their different countries, compared to, of course, the older people, the older counterparts. Why do you think this is the case?
It's about critical mass at all the time, right? All the time. One person with a great idea will have their voices lost in a crowd. But when you give the same type of chant to everybody in a political rally, you begin to feel the reverberation of people saying something very, very simple. Again, I'll draw an example from Barack Obama's time. In the middle of one of his speeches, actually, after he'd just won his first primary in the US, right, in 2007, he made a couple of statements and then he said, "Yes, we can." And then after a few more seconds, he repeated the word, "Yes, we can." And over the course of that speech, he said, "Yes, we can," at least 10 times. And that simple phrase caught fire. And the next time he said that, he was not the only one saying, "Yes, we can." You had crowds of 20,000 people saying, "Yes, we can." All of a sudden, his message went beyond him, and his message became the message of crowds. And then, "Yes, we can" went all over social media. "Yes, we can" went on websites. "Yes, we can" went on t-shirts. "Yes, we can" went all over the world. And all of a sudden, you had more people better positioned to use the words "yes, we can" to achieve their objectives. In South Africa here, when folks were protesting against apartheid, a very simple chant, "Amandla, Awethu," became a rallying cry for people to realize that if you have multiple people saying the same things, singing from the same hymn sheet with the same level of inspiration, you're likelier to achieve your purpose than if you're the only one standing. Now, when you extrapolate these two examples into the world of politics, one young, brilliant African who shows up wanting to change a system is far less likely to achieve their objective than if they come as an army, they come as a team better prepared. The victory or the successes of the older generations is that they have built political machinery. And those machineries span across multiple regions of the country. They've accessed funding, they've found foot soldiers, and they're able to equip people with t-shirts, with posters, with banners, with bags of rice, with all kinds of things to sing the same song that they're singing. So what's the advice for young people who are thinking about politics? Get together, right? You can't do it alone. Not a single one of us can do it alone. We need to get together. We need to build critical mass. The more people you have saying the same type of things, the likelier it is that you're going to succeed. That is what the older generation knows, and that is what they have done successfully. Look at the political parties you know. They have thousands and hundreds of thousands of foot soldiers. They cannot be defeated because they have representatives in every household. So the young person who's coming up today wants to go up against that same machinery. You don't stand a chance. You don't stand a chance. So we need to humble ourselves and do the work of building our own armies, step by step, day by day. See, as powerful, and I draw analogies to the US democracy because we have access to information about how it works. As powerful as Barack Obama's machinery was with the Democratic Party, right? They had visibility across the whole country. If you read analysis about political campaigns, they go knocking doors, door to door. They don't simply sit and post on Facebook and expect things to happen. They go knocking door to door. Matter of fact, the book I'm currently reading was by one of Barack Obama's team members, people who were very, very influential in his campaign and eventually in his government. But she was saying that the day of the election, of his first election in 2008, after she cast her vote, she then drove back to go and knock on doors in various neighborhoods saying, "Today is the day we vote, please go out and vote." It's not enough that they've done the work for 2 straight years. It's not enough that today's election day and everyone knows it. I mean, come on, it's election day, people are going to go vote, right? No, the election day, people were still knocking on doors, one door after the other, go and vote. But young people today want to post on Facebook and that's it. No, you don't simply post on Facebook and let Facebook do your job for you. You're going to have to go out there and do the work and maybe you have a chance of success, maybe, but you're going to have to go out there and do the work. It won't simply come to you. That's my perspective.
Okay, so Pastor Faith, you made mention of two things: critical mass, and
Yes.
you made a lot of mentions about political parties. So, of
Yes.
course, a couple of young people who are interested in having that impact politically on the continent are often looking for a political home. And the instinctive thing to do, given that there are a lot of people who have already established themselves, is to try to choose from what is in existence where you want to identify. But in most cases, you find out that you look at the political parties in existence and none of them aligns either with your values or the aspirations that you think you have for your country. So what advice would you give to a young person who is trying to look for a political home?
I have two perspectives, neither of which is correct, neither of which is wrong, but they are approaches. The first approach is to say there's a short-term game, and the short-term game is to use the machinery that exists. If I want to achieve anything in South Africa today, there is one political party that has been in power for the last 26 years. There are other political parties that have tried, and they're continuing to gain momentum day after day, year after year, but for 26 years, they have not got a share of the federal purse. So the short-term game is, I need to go fight in the machinery that exists, the one that is almost guaranteed to grant me access to the path that I'm trying to get to. Obviously, the path is a lot more congested. There are lots of people in my way, but this is the party that has the machinery. They have presence. Simply by identifying with this party, I've got foot soldiers across the country. It's a short-term approach. It doesn't have to be the right approach, but that's the shortest possible path to achieving an objective. The other part is a longer route, is a long path, right? Let me go create my own party with a group of my friends and gradually begin to do the work. And maybe over the course of 50 years, we would have built a strong enough machinery to get people into power. None of them is the right approach, but they're both approaches, right? I've seen this happen so many times, and as someone who's evolving my own political philosophy as well, I'm observing the movements of young aspirants in politics today in my country, Nigeria, and other countries as well. People don't want to be associated with the corrupt parties of the day. So they go create a whole new political party. But the party you're creating has no recognition beyond you and your friends. It will take the rest of your life, potentially, to get that party to have the same brand recognition as the parties that exist today. So you can hold on to your ideology and join the queue, or you can put your ideology on the ground and say, I'm willing to take my ideology into the systems that I so dislike and try to find a way to allow my good to flush out the bad that's in there. And so if you were to ask me to choose what my advice would be, I'll say join an existing political party as much as it disgusts you. Join a political party that has a machinery, because that is the engine through which you have a chance of reshaping the national narrative. But if you go create your own party, maybe in 50 years, your party will have name recognition, but maybe by then you'll be too tired to even continue the fight. And so on my recommendation of joining existing parties, there's an analogy that comes to mind. And I watched this in a TED talk that someone presented. They said, if you've got a dirty glass of water, a glass that's half full of dirty water, there is a way to replace that dirty water with clean water. And it's not by pouring out the dirty water. You simply hold that glass of dirty water under a tap of running clean water. And the clean water entering that glass will disperse the dirt in that glass over time. The same glass that came in dirty, holding a lot of dirty water, do the experiment. Simply place that glass of dirty water under a running tap of clean water. Over time, the dirt will be dispersed because you're bringing in more good than dirt. Similarly, you can put a lot of dirt into a clean glass, and over time, that glass becomes dirty. So the analogy, therefore, is for young people to say, if I've got value systems that I believe are refined and they're exactly who I want to be. Let's go as a critical mass, one person, two people, five people. Let's infiltrate those same political parties that we perceive to be so dirty that we don't want to be associated with them. Let's bring our good in there. Over time, our good will disperse the bad. And then we have a different political party.
Pastor Faith, just maybe on the side, with all these tactics and political philosophies, do you have any political aspirations yourself, at least for active engagement?
I've gone back and forth several times to analyze where I will be most useful in my generation. Certainly the public sector is one that concerns me the most and one that I feel the most affinity for, for helping to create change. It is certainly possible that I will get into political roles in the future. Currently, I don't live in Nigeria, which is where I have the best chance of having political influence. And I have not lived in Nigeria for more than 10 years. So there is no direct path for me to be influential in the politics of my country directly. So I perceive that the work I might be able to do right now is perhaps going to be more Pan-African and maybe to try to walk through the institutions that I'm able to access as a national of Nigeria, regardless of where I live. I can't be involved in the politics of South Africa today because I'm not a citizen of the country. And so I'm choosing to pursue my advocacy and my political aspirations through a Pan-African lens as of today. But over time, if my path takes me back to Nigeria, and if I'm able to help to build that critical mass, there's no reason why I will not seek to be involved in creating the change that I talk about.
Okay. So just in one of your posts recently on Medium about I don't know how recent it was, but you are writing about the resurgence of populism in the world right now.
Yes, populism.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it's important for Africa to once again support political salons as an avenue,
Yes.
to help grow the youth. So, what role exactly do you think this plays in upbringing of Africa's future leaders?
You can consider the early Model African Union an example of a political salon, right? You can consider this conversation that we're having right now as an example of a political salon. How many more of these do we need to create? And how many more voices do we have to create, bring into the conversation to have politics look different? Right. So the beauty of political salons in the ancient times was that people were schooled through conversation, through inquiry, by listening to experts. And they formulated their ideologies by being in places where these conversations never stopped. And so you have the average citizen being so well informed about political systems, about economic policy, about social domestic policy, etc. We have the exact opposite today, where people can't be bothered to even read the headlines or to read below the headlines. Very, 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 very few Africans by proportion are comfortable enough to have conversations about domestic policies of the countries, about foreign policies of the countries, about any form of economic ideology. We're busying ourselves with things that don't matter or with things that don't have capacity or potential to create wide-scale change. So I'm desperate to be involved in more conversations like this with hundreds, with thousands, in which we're formulating ideologies through conversation and through inquiry. How much richer will our countries be politically if the average citizen was involved, was informed, and willing to participate? That will be a very different country. The reasons that our political leaders thrive the way they do is because they know that they can't be harmed. The citizens don't know better. So when it's time for elections, you throw them a couple bags of rice, you're going to be fine. That system of politics needs to change. But I fear that it might not change. We might have lost it because people don't want to get involved. So I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more political schools in which people like you and I can sit and have conversations. And right now, we're not even having a debate, we're having a conversation. Imagine if we're having a proper debate in which we would discuss an economic policy of a country, right? When a country like South Africa right now is seeing its COVID-19 cases rise, dramatically, and there are lots of concerns about how to get the economy back on its feet, how to protect lives and livelihoods, etc. I would love a handsome debate in which people with different perspectives can come to the table about how to achieve the same objective, but perhaps in different ways. I want to listen to those debates. But as of today, all I'm hearing is blanket criticism. The government doesn't know what they're doing. Well, what do you think they should be doing? I mean, let's have a quality debate. What would you do differently if you were the president of the country? You understand the state of the economy, you understand the state of people's lives, you understand the weaknesses of inequality, and you want to do your best to protect lives and livelihoods. What would you do? So I'm tired of hearing people simply say, oh, these presidents don't know what they're doing. We need to move away from that style of conversation into, I am an economist, I understand how budgets work, I understand the constraints in this country, here is my policy proposal. And another person comes and says, I'm a social activist, and here is the lens I take, and I listen to your points, well, here's how I think your points are flawed compared to this. The more of those we have, now citizens like you and I who might be on the receiving end, we get a chance to formulate our own ideologies by listening to different perspectives. And maybe when it's our time, we have a chance to do it differently. Otherwise, same of the same, we get the same results.
Oh, interesting. So, Mr. Faith, I'm of the opinion that one of the reasons why most African governments and dictatorial regimes thrive the most is because of ignorance. They perpetuate ignorance as much as possible. And once people are ignorant, it's very easy to sway them with these small gifts come election time, and with, of course, demagoguery and all of this. So do you think this is one of the reasons why we are losing out a lot on political education and political servants as such, that the people who are supposed to be backing such a system are actually up for keeping the people as ignorant as possible about how exactly they can change things?
I agree that ignorance is a problem. I don't know how much of it is deliberately fostered, right? Because we can't say. I have not been in presidential palaces where we've had these conversations that we have to keep people ignorant. But there are things that are done by commission, the things that are done by omission. So there are times when you directly make people live in a type of cocoon because you want to keep them there. There's another one in which you simply don't do what is necessary for them to escape that cocoon, and both approaches leave people in the same position. So I think that the bigger challenge in our continent is that we haven't been deliberate enough about uplifting people from poverty. We haven't done the work to move people from where they are, therefore they remain there. So I don't take the perspective that our governments want to keep us ignorant. I don't think so. I don't even think they have the time to develop strategies to keep us ignorant. They simply aren't trying to move people from where they are to where they could be. They aren't trying enough. So this is where the work of developing society goes beyond the public sector. And one of my most determined approaches, or one of the things that I'm most passionate about, is trying to figure out the intersection of public, private, and nonprofit sectors to achieve development objectives. Certainly, I'm convinced that governments by themselves do not have what it takes to uplift people from poverty. Governments cannot create jobs. Governments can only create the regulatory environment that makes it possible for the private sector to create jobs. Governments cannot upskill every citizen, but governments can make it possible for non-profit organizations to create programs that train citizens and improve their skills. Governments cannot lead advocacy, but governments can make it possible for the media to use their platforms to advocate for causes that matter to them. So the job of governments is to create the environment that allows all kinds of players to come into a common space and do their part to uplift society. So I'm right now, really interested in understanding the work that private sector players can do to uplift people from poverty. The work that they're currently doing is, endowing scholarships a lot. There are lots of scholarships that are coming from private pockets, and there are lots of scholarships coming from, from businesses and wealthy people that allow other citizens who otherwise will not be able to afford education to get a good education. And you have lots of nonprofits that play the role in facilitating these trainings, right? Doing after-school tutoring here, doing employment preparation programs. There are all kinds of schemes designed to democratize access to information. So governments by themselves cannot do it. How many people can a government reach? Governments are supposed to be small and lean, but nonprofits and private sector players have got to be able to come to the table and do their part to even the playing ground for everyone.
Yeah, so, Mr. Faith, just from politics, just take you back a bit to innovation. So you've launched a number of initiatives yourself. I mean, you've pioneered a couple very, very impressive and impactful projects over the years. I mean, Future Africa,
Yes.
Passion to Passion, the Global Impact Network, the Speech Academy, and ALA MAU itself. So how would you advise a young person seeking out to be a person of impact, to connect their lives to as many people as possible? How would you advise them to sort of find their space and to approach innovation from wherever they are?
My approach is that as a young person, you have boundless potential to attempt things. None of your ideas has to last a lifetime. None of your ideas have to be the one idea that you run with. It's actually a little bit arrogant to believe that what you create at the age of 18 is going to change the world when you're 50. You don't have to start out that way. So as a young person, all you have to do is just keep trying things out. The more things you try out, the more you fail, the more you learn from them, and not every single project that I have created survives today. Some still do, but some have morphed into other things. And so my approach is what I still believe is the right thing for young people to do. Do as much as you can, right? Do as much as you can, but then when you figure out what you do the best, do that one thing. So do as much as you can, but then do the most what you do the best. That has been my own mantra for more than a decade. And it's the way I still speak to young people. So as a young person, I was involved in journalism, I'm involved in public speaking, I'm involved in debate, I'm involved in every type of thing, creating nonprofits, the whole thing. I'm not gonna do all of those things for the rest of my life, but the skills that I generate from doing those things, the lessons that I learned from my failures, the teams that I build, I get a chance to take those things and keep doing them so that maybe I started with 10 things. If at the end of my life, I got 3 of them to level of success, those 3 will have the lessons from all the 10 things that I begun to do, and they have a better chance of success. So for a young person out there, start a project, launch your organization, start a small business, start a blog. There are no restrictions, absolutely no restrictions on what a young person can do. But the more of those things you do, the more you realize which ones you do better than other things. And then you keep investing in those things that seem to have the potential to last long. That's been my approach, and it's what I still recommend. So if you're a young person out there, you have one obligation. That obligation is to be as busy as you can be. As busy as you can be. A young person doesn't need vacations, don't need downtime. Be out there doing as much as you can. And when you figure out which of the things you do that drives you the most and delivers the best results, keep doing that one thing, because maybe that's your chance of success.
So Faith, I was reading a blog this morning about the concept of breakthrough knowledge, and they were defining it as, or someone was defining it as information that you access that sort of drastically changes the direction and trajectory of your life. And it could happen overnight or in an instant.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you, what material, what book, or maybe what information did you access that right now in your life you would consider being breakthrough knowledge for you?
I've had several of those, to be honest, several of those. And each piece moves me further in life than where I was before I read that. Matter of fact, I'm right now at my table, and this is the book that I'm reading. Is a autobiography by Susan Rice. It's called Tough Love. And Susan Rice was recently, US ambassador to the United Nations, and the national security advisor. But as I read this book, and I've now read 10 chapters, I'm reading 3 chapters a day of the book until I finish it. The perspectives I hold today, 10 chapters in, I did not have them on Saturday when I began to read this book. So I've already experienced some breakthrough by opening my eyes to imagine what this woman was doing at the age of 28 when she first joined Bill Clinton's government. And I'm imagining, oh my gosh, I was 28 a while back. What have I been doing, right? And so those are the types of moments that propel you, because you're able to contrast where you are with where other people were. And you ask yourself, did I have fewer resources than they had? Did I have fewer friends than they had? Did I have fewer, opportunities to do things? Did I have a weaker education? You get a chance to contrast yourself with other change makers, and you imagine the path they've been on and where you are today. I read a lot of stuff. I read from almost every source that I can find on earth, but I find the greatest pleasure in reading autobiographies and biographies, because there is nothing as powerful as a person's narrative of their own lives. And recently, I've taken on that same path of documenting episodes of my own life and trying to extract those lessons, because I may not be in position right now to write a full autobiography. But by the time I'm done documenting different pieces of my life, my autobiography would have been written in all kinds of formats, and people will certainly be able to say that I contributed pieces of myself into helping to shape them into who they are. And so that's how I have chosen to write. I'm bringing out my scale of writing with my perspective from reading several autobiographies. That if people who have gone before me have taken the pain to document episodes in their lives and the lessons they learned from their failures and the weaknesses and the self-analysis, maybe I should do the same thing for people who are coming behind me. And I've certainly got, perspectives from people who are saying, what you're saying right now about your life and the lessons you've learned, they're changing the way I look forward. So my challenge to young people, read autobiographies of people who are doing the types of things you want to do. If you want to be an inventor, well, go read the biographies of inventors. Go read about Nikola Tesla, and go read about how, he imagined the future of the world from when he was living in New York more than a century ago. Go read that stuff, right? If you want to be a political leader, then go read Winston Churchill's books. Go read Barack Obama's books. Read Bill Clinton's books. Read about the political leaders whom you know and whom you admire. There are lots of African leaders as well whose readings I'm beginning to, to really wrap my head around. But I've read various accounts of, the Biafra War. I've read Olusegun Obasanjo's memoirs. I've read about Nigeria's political leaders. I've read, Nelson Mandela's books. I'm exposing myself to as many types of writings as possible, right? I read about Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, all kinds of leaders. So the more you understand the journeys of the people who have done the types of things you're trying to do, the more you can imagine, or at least position yourself on a spectrum, on a scale, and say, where am I today on the type of journey that these people walked? And then I can situate myself. Do I feel I'm ahead of time? Do I feel I'm behind time? Do I have the same constraints? Do I not have the same constraints? What do I have to do? So that's what I'm discovering in my life to be very influential. I could talk about a ton of books that I've read, but when I've read biographies and autobiographies, on the business front, I've read nearly every book that Richard Branson has written, because he's a business person whose career inspires me, beginning with a lot of difficulty and what you consider lack of privilege, and flipping the script in its head and going all the way to achieve the successes he has achieved with the Virgin Group. And on the political front, I'm going all the way from ancient times, Plato's and the rest of them, all the way to modern politics, and reading people who are still in politics today. I'm reading accounts of history, particularly the wars. Our world has been shaped on the back of wars. So we need to understand what happened, what propelled World War I, what propelled World War II, what propelled the Cold War, what propelled the Vietnam War, what propelled Biafra in Nigeria, what propelled the genocide in Rwanda. You need to understand, because wars are the basest levels of humanity. When humanity comes to its absolute lowest level, we devolve into wars. So you need to understand what takes humanity to that level, and then imagine how we can begin to rise from there. And those have been some of my perspectives.
Faith, I'll surely visit your library as soon as I'm
You're
able
wel-
to.
I've got several titles in my library, and it's you can't change what you don't understand, isn't it? You really can't, and so you need to exhaust yourself in learning about how the world came to where it is today, and maybe you have a chance of doing things differently.
So Faith, the next time you pass by ALA Gates, you should definitely drop me a book.
I should drop you a book or two.
Yeah. Okay, just maybe the final ones. Let me see, what do we have here? Okay, yeah. So I've had an opportunity of being a part of your flock in the church because we're the pastor. So I just want to ask you about the role that you think the church can play in preparing young people to lead both themselves and their communities.
The church over time has played, several important roles in driving society forward. The history of the world, the church was definitely influential in shaping constitutions of nations. Many of our national constitutions are influenced by our religious beliefs in the role of the church in organizing and then in giving people a moral framework. The church certainly has played a role in advancing education. You have lots of missionary schools across the world. The church has played an important role in influencing literacy, right? Teaching people to read and to write based on what they're looking for, looking at in the Bible. The church plays a role of giving people a moral framework, a compass. Many people, find themselves calm, at peace when they're learning, about other people in biblical times who experience various things. So there are lots of roles the church can play. But going forward, I think the church has an important role to play as a lightning rod in society. The church has to position itself the way Jesus recommended for his people to position themselves, as the light of the world, the salt of the earth, your vehicles of virtue. We're supposed to be going out there to make society better. One of the best attributes of the church collectively across the world is its capacity to organize. There are very, very few institutions that can organize as well as churches can, because people already operate with a sense of routine. Churches have massive infrastructure. And this infrastructure is simply in systems and processes, etc., beyond even the physical edifices that we see. So my hope will be that the church will take its special skill of convening, of organizing, of instructing, of galvanizing, and imagining what aspects of society it can step into. Personally, I will not be a part of a church that is not socially committed. I will not be a part of a church that's not imagining how it can play a role, making a difference in society. And the churches I've been a part of have been very, very influential in society. Churches have been sponsoring research. Churches have been doing after-school tutoring for poor students. Churches have been doing career counseling and doing, job place readiness training for unemployed people. The church has incredible potential. And my hope will be that every church I get a chance to be a part of, and every church that I draw my influence from, will be one that understands its place in society and is being a salt wherever it is, making people's lives easier. And I hope that every other Christian will take their cue from Jesus and take the cue from the words of the apostles who recommended to people, like, true religion is in looking after people. It's not in having a fancy suit every Sunday. It's not in living exclusive lives and what is for us belongs to us. The true religion is looking after widows, looking after orphans, making education possible, making housing possible. That is what religion is all about. And that's my hope for Christianity.
Yeah, maybe the last one, just the last question is regarding the disruption in which we find ourselves due to COVID-19. How best, or what do you recommend a young person out there? How best do you think that they should utilize this time that has been created? Because for some countries, school is a dead year. School is not opening again. For others, they find themselves having more time than they usually do at this point of the year. So how would you advise a young person out there to utilize the time that they have now?
On the front of education, my advice to the young person would be, don't let COVID-19 halt education. It may halt your schooling, but it must not halt your education, right? And it's a little bit it should be an easy point to drive home, right? You may not be able to go to school today, but how much are you learning outside school? Because what you learn in school is actually a small component of what you're supposed to learn in life, right? So regardless where you find yourself, there are resources you have to take advantage of. So let's assume you're living in the worst position possible. You're in some rural area, can't access school, can't even get anything else done out there. Get a job, work, go out there and work on a farm. And the education you will get from working on that farm, 8 hours a day, in the sun or in the rain, that education will never leave you. Some of my most formative experiences have come from working in a farm, right? I did not have access to school all the time. So consider this a very long holiday that you have to use to get all the things that you will not get in school. School will resume one day. We're eventually going to go back to school at some point. But between now and then, what would you have learned? And if you're in a more privileged position, you've got access to the internet, you've got books, you've got a space to live in, you've got food to eat. All you don't have is school. This is the time to accelerate your education, right? Get on YouTube and Google how to. Anything that comes afterwards, click the 5th one, or click the 7th one, or click the 10th one, and just watch that video. Life is so simple. The whole thing has been curated neatly for you, and you might even have better perspectives of what you want to learn. I was thinking a couple of weeks ago, I want to learn graphics design, at a level that I need to be able to learn. Like, I can design a little bit, but I want to learn. And you realize many of these tutorials for Adobe Photoshop, all those things, cost you $25, cost you $30. Right there on YouTube, there's a whole tutorial on Adobe Illustrator that's completely free. And this is hours and hours of tutorials, cost free. And I'm thinking to myself, I happen to live in a space where I've got, I'm paying for internet access, and I have unlimited connectivity, because when I pay for the whole month, it's there for the whole month, 24/7. So what if I spend an hour a day watching these videos that have been put up there for free? I don't have to pay. It's a mindset shift. So young people have no business complaining, no business. Let COVID take however long it takes. When school resumes, you will go back to school. But between now and then, what would you have learned? That's the question. One day you will go back to a physical classroom, but the global classroom is always open. So who are you fooling? Get out there and learn something. That's what you have to do.
Thank you very much, Pastor Floyd.
Revisiting this conversation, it's easy to understand why the clarion call, or what you'd call the tagline of the Fourth Generation podcast, then became the fact that one cannot change what one does not understand. That fundamental to the process of change is that critical step, as we said at the beginning, of interrogating, as Mr. Faith would mention, the evolution of society, where society has come from, but also just the historical development of the processes which we hope to intervene in. And I still look back on this conversation, and I think it lays very good groundwork for thinking about the role of young people in engaging with political processes. And just that reminder that age is not qualification. Age is also not, and youth in particular, is not a guarantee of efficiency. Most times young people tend to feel entitled towards political space, but we should be bringing more than just our biology to the table. President Museveni likes to say that we should not confuse biology for ideology. I agree with the spirit of that statement. The practice is another issue, but that is definitely something that we can take away from this conversation. The Fourth Generation Fireside will continue. So expect future episodes with more conversations with people who have engaged with issues of society, both theoretically and practically. And hopefully in the future we'll have video form content coming your way as well. But till then, stay learning, stay hungry, and stay engaged with the future of our continent. Bye.